Well, hi, everybody. it's, I never know when I can do these programs. It is late here. It is the 23rd. And I just want to say that Tuya and I regret that we cannot do the ingress to Scorpio tomorrow at 4:30 a.m. GMT. But there are technical, weather, and health issues involved, and I just want Tuya to be able to take some antibiotics and to be in better shape than she is to try to deliver that program. So remember, this is a time, well, of course, you may be hearing this at a completely different time, but a time of testing, when we test trial and triumph, struggle, strength, and Sagittarian attitudes. This is what we can expect when we make the proper decision and we go forward. Now, we're at program number 9, and we only covered really one page last time. DK has given us some simplifications of the telepathic relationship between the communicator, the communicant, and the means of communication. It's a bit like the thinker and the thought, and that which is the means of thought. Now, I don't know how long this will go on. It's a bit of a miracle that I'm actually beginning this program at this point. I figured it was over for tonight, but then a little wave of possibility hit me. So now he's actually reviewing 10 different methods. He says not too much, well, that much will remain theoretical, and little can as yet be worked out in practice. However, he says, let me list the various forms of telepathic work. And for your general instruction, and then one day, of course, some of the higher forms of this type of work will actually be worked out. The lower forms are what we seek not to identify with, and yet they are so common, even among the intelligent. So, in fact, this is the 23rd of October, and let's just begin and see what the Master has to say when he expands the 3 different methods which end up with a soul-mind-brain alignment into a review of 10 different methods. I think we can all see, friends, that the study required here is considerable. I'm just amazed at these books that he is writing and seeing how every one of them could require the extremely focused attention of anyone who was in a particular seed group and of the seed group as a whole. And let's always remember the meditations he has given largely in the Dhyana books, which include the heart center, the throat center, the ajna center, and the thousand-petaled lotus, and especially the sort of zodiac, which is located at the very heart or center of the thousand-petaled lotus. I'm always quite amazed that some very intelligent people think that all knowledge of any truly intellectual and valuable kind began with the Greeks. Well, it's true they contributed a great deal, but the 6 schools of Indian philosophy have so much to contribute and have over the years, and even in Atlantean days, although the average person could not think as we call the act of thinking, at least there was some kind of communication between the communicator and the and the average communicant, and really an emphasis on the medium of communication, which is some form of the ether. Okay, so program 9, and the very first type of telepathic work that he mentions is a form of instinctual telepathy from solar plexus to solar plexus. The I have a feeling type of communication, and I don't know why, and I have to act on that feeling, and whole groups can be swept by the same feeling, just the way animal flocks and herds are swept by some sort of feeling which inclines them all to pivot and go in the same direction. Basically, he says, and it's true, that we have spent quite a bit of time in the programs above with this form of telepathy. The Tibetan says to us, with this we have already dealt. And then he goes on to say, this is closely connected with feeling, and little or no thought is involved. Maybe we pause to think about that. Pause to think about that. Because it does move many people who just feel that way, and they don't know why. And if they think they know why, it's usually some illusory cause that inclines them or adds to their feeling. Master DK looks at feeling differently from Master Moria. Master Moria, I think, gives it rather more dignity and connects it with the feeling of the heart. But for Master DK, it's a solar plexus reaction. So we've dealt with this, and let's try to think, as DK says a couple of things here, that this is closely connected with feeling, and little or no thought is involved. It concerns emotions, and may I add, things that come upon you, attitudes, based on, I guess, attraction and repulsion that come upon you or on your group. It concerns emotion. Fear is a big one. Fear, hate is another one. And we saw that demonstrating in the attempted overthrow of the due process of government. I'm having a kind of problem with the computer here. Disgust or rejection is another one. It concerns emotions: fear, hate, disgust, love, desire, and many other purely astral reactions. Remember, the law of love, which is a systemic law, is connected with the astral plane. It's the sixth law. And all of this, says the Tibetan in the following way, it is carried on instinctively and below the diaphragm. The true solar plexus center is below the diaphragm. There is a correspondence in the pranic triangle above the diaphragm. It's a kind of middle center in the pranic triangle, but it's above the diaphragm. So can you pause for a moment and think of when you were unthinkingly swept by this type of emotional reaction? Now, it may be a while after the attempted insurrection that you are reading this, but I just felt that the crowd there was hardly a collection of sightseers. They had something hateful on their mind, and some kind of, should I even call it mind, in their consciousness, and some sort of disgust was sweeping through them, and some sort of devoted love for their manipulative, demagogic champion, the author of The Big Lie that brought them to justify, brought them to the Capitol to justify the overthrow of basically democratic process. So we just have to pause and think, may I add, that there are many unthinking astral reactions. Can you think, well, there we go again. Can you detect or remember any time that you were involved in such reactions? Well, no doubt you were. No doubt I was. Because he says that even if the communicator is sending a mental message, it is frequently taken up by the astral body and not by the throat center, to which it was, let's say, targeted. Thought does not arouse thought. It arouses something that is far more built in, far more ancient. So we do have to be on the lookout for that. Okay, then there's telepathic work from mind to mind. This is a higher form of telepathy, and it is more of the nature of an Aryan process, looking at the word Aryan as related to a type of consciousness and not to a material race, as Hitler did. So from mind to mind, it's not Atlantean in its nature, and it took a long time to evolve because human beings had to learn how to think, and that was not an easy process, and took a long while. I'm going to I have a computer which will not tolerate an overload. It's a bit like the condition that I'm in at the moment. The attempt to overload leads to ill effects. Okay, and I'm hoping that I'm hoping that this is working out properly. So, have you had the experience of mind-to-mind telepathy from, let's say, a superior communicator attempting to reach your mind or the mind of the group in which you are focused? Now, notice, may I add, how slow a process it really is. I hope I don't have an explosion here. This computer is making very weird and unpleasant sounds. And let's see. So anyway, DK says that this type of telepathy, really following a change of root races from the Atlantean to the Aryan, is only beginning. It's beginning to be possible. He says this is beginning to be possible. And many more people are capable of this kind of communication than is now realized. And people don't today, he says, people today do not know whence various mental impressions come. And this greatly enhances the complexity of life at this time and increases the mental problems of thousands. So something is coming through of mental suggestion, but its source, its origin, is not understood. Now, if we pause, have you had experiences beyond the I have a feeling that, the Atlantean method of imposition, to I have a definite thought that thus and so, and maybe you are inclined to follow that thought and to think that you understand more because that thought has come through. It only may come from your soul. It only may come from your master or some much higher being. It's likely to come from another powerful thinker to or with whom you are somehow subtly attuned and simply don't realize it. So let's pause. Do you recall any such thought dropping into your consciousness and you giving attention to it and somehow thinking that it brings some degree of illumination? See, may I add, we have to be very observant about our thought life and the origin of those thoughts. Many thoughts we may simply repeat. They are our stock in trade. We just think that way, but sometimes something new comes in, which we can actually call a mental telepathy. And it, like I say, it's taken the change of a whole root race to make this possible. In Atlantean days, even the communicator was far more limited than the communicator is now. But still, we have to realize that Master Decay and the Angel of the Presence, they work telepathically with the soul, which is a state of consciousness about which much is said, but about which much confusion still reigns. In the consciousness of many, what is the difference between the soul, the solar angel, the angel of the presence? People are very confused on these matters. So if I were to sum up what I'm trying to say here, a greater degree of observation is needed in all matters of the reception of energies and impressions. Otherwise, we will just confuse everything and say, oh yeah, that's my thought. Or we will fail to realize that the Master is working telepathically with us on soul levels. Or we will think that all thoughts that arise in our mind are really ours when they, in fact, began someplace else. Now, what else? We've had 2 of the 10 modes, one belonging very much to instinctual telepathy, that is, work from solar plexus to solar plexus, and, well, maybe one can hardly call it work. It's just a type of receptivity. And then more deliberate work from mind to mind. And now, something also very necessary, telepathic work from heart to heart. I'll put it in a different color here. Telepathic work from heart to heart, which is a unifying work, and without which true group telepathy is not really going to be possible. So DK goes on to say, this type of impression is the sublimation of the feeling response registered earlier upon the ladder of evolution in the solar plexus. Now that is his answer in a way to how Master Moria sees heart reaction, heart feeling. What can he mean here? The sublimation. You know, in the laboratory when you submit iodine to increasing heat, it doesn't turn liquid. It vaporizes. It sublimates, we might say. But it is definitely nothing so low as instinctual, solar plexus, unthinking, instinctual solar plexus response. And DK does mention here the ladder of evolution, because always higher and higher points of tension are reached by the communicator, and the communicator is attempting higher types of transmission to the communicant higher along the ladder of evolution. I frequently, may I say, talk about the ladder of evolution and how it is changed or somehow brings about elevation. So may I add, we have to think about the quality of the kind of impressions that we get. Of course, so often people getting impressions of no great quality at all think of them as important. And in fact, they're just part of the almost animal type of instinctual telepathy. Now, I want to add that throughout the teaching, we're told that the heart is a group organ, and that when we have personal love, it is the solar plexus at work. But group love requires the heart center. And that's why the Tibetan says the following. It, and I assume he means telepathic work from heart to heart, it concerns only group impressions and is the basis of the condition spoken of in the Bible in connection with the greatest sensitive humanity has ever produced, the Christ. Oh, that's a tremendous statement. The greatest sensitive that humanity has ever produced. And we live in such a time that he will be not among us for 3 years, or, a public ministry of 3 years, but will have a ministry lasting some 2,000 years. We can't say exactly how long, but at the end of it all, he and the Buddha will move on to higher points of tension, and his place will be taken by another, and the place of both of them at the major festivals will be taken, we're told, in externalization of the hierarchy by many representatives, which I think is an interesting way to bring their influence forward in a powerful manner at important times. So this heart, the heart, and just think of it, friends, how and when you find yourself using the heart. This heart concerns only group impressions. And I'm sure that Master DK, in some of his group meditations, attempted to reach, I think it says so above, his diverse group with that which would stimulate the heart center of the group, and thus make a unification that did not exist before, make that unification possible. I'm still arrested by the idea of the greatest sensitive humanity has ever produced. And maybe you are taken by that as well. And here we have the opportunity, being reborn as we are at this time, to work in the presence of that sensitive, the initial initiator of those who are taking the initiations of the threshold. So what does it mean to us that the great Lord, the rider from the secret place, the modern version of the Kalki avatar, is the greatest sensitive that humanity has ever produced? Even when you think of the Christ, you realize that because of his power of identification, there can be no barrier effective to keep him out of identification with what you are, with what I am. He simply knows what is in man, as the greatest of the psychics. Remember, the psychic is primarily produced along the second ray, the greatest of the psychics. And in this, in the Bible, it refers to him in a way that many would not think appropriate. There, says the Tibetan, he is referred to as a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Now, this he demonstrated in the Garden of Gethsemane, but it was much more than any kind of personal grief about facing the very unpleasant prospect of crucifixion. So, as DK says, there's no personal sorrow or grief involved. And there is something that we just have to understand. It's difficult for us to understand that because, we are rather personal beings. And we attempt to, as we interpret, to interpret in a personal manner. So pause for a moment and say, what can it be that he has sorrows and grief, and yet is not thinking of himself, is not referencing his own personhood? We have to remember that at that time, he was already the head of the spiritual hierarchy, and in a way had been so from the time that the true Buddha left that position. The Gautama, the prince, was simply a vehicle for the true Buddha, just the way the initiate Jesus was a vehicle for the great Christ. No personal sorrow or grief is involved. I mean, can we even reproduce that? Because so much of our grief or sorrow is all about us in a personal sense. And then DK goes on to explain. It is simply the, that gives me a chance to check. It is simply the consciousness of the sorrow of the world and the weight of grief under which humanity struggles. That's his acquaintance with sorrow and grief. It is humanity's sorrow and grief. The fellowship of Christ's suffering is the reaction of the disciple to the same world condition. Okay, well, I'll take it this far. The weight of grief under which humanity suffers, so identified is the Christ with humanity's suffering that he suffers on behalf of them, of us, of every one of us. Now, these are unusual thoughts for us to entertain and are not easy to entertain. We do get the idea that he is the Savior, but his saviorship has been so pitifully reduced to the demand that people simply believe in him without doing anything, and then they will be saved by being transported to quite a boring and fatuous heaven forever. The weight of grief under which humanity struggles. And now our part in that is the fellowship of Christ's suffering. It is the reaction of the disciple to the same world condition. Then we will be increasingly, as we expect the new group of world servers will be, and in its higher ranks already is, part of the fellowship of Christ's suffering. So, we pause to say, well, we can't replicate what the great Lord, the greatest sensitive humanity has ever produced, what he can do, and how he feels or responds. But how much are we a part of this fellowship of Christ's suffering, which doesn't simply mean taking up some kind of martyrdom, because the initiate Jesus experienced a martyrdom. In other words, it's not simply a sixth ray response. So I repeat then what the Tibetan said: the fellowship of Christ's suffering is the reaction of the disciple to the same, and I would add the word grievous, to the same grievous world condition. And now DK is explaining what all this means from the point of view of esotericism. He's redefining certain concepts which have been reduced in their significance by the misunderstanding of the many, by the emotional and mental limitations of the many. This is, to me, always a surprising statement. This is the true broken heart. Well, it's interesting, even today, the idea of the broken heart is coming into public awareness, but I think much more as it would be understood by a personally focused individual. But anyway, if we join in the proper sense the fellowship of Christ's suffering, we will experience the true broken heart, as the Tibetan calls it, and is as yet a very rare thing to find. Now, doesn't that really make us think about how esotericism comes along and gives us a much deeper understanding of that which has been rendered so cramped and confined by the limitations of unthinking human response and misinterpretations of thought. The true broken heart. This is something maybe that I haven't thought about with the attention it deserves. You can see that the Tibetan knows what he's talking about, and that as a master of the wisdom and a great lover of humanity, as he once said, he could become discouraged, he said, did he not love humanity so much. It's a very rare thing to find as yet. Now, what other things does one, in fact, find? The usual broken heart is literally a disrupted solar plexus, bringing complete demolition. That's quite a word. It has to do with being demolished or wiped out. It's frequently a word that is used in the wrecking industry. Those people are called in with the wrecking ball, and they are asked to demolish certain structures. So, repeating what DK has to say here, the usual broken heart is literally a disrupted solar plexus center, bringing complete demolition of what is occultly called the center of feeling, and consequently the wrecking of the nervous system. So may I add that a condition of nervous agitation and disorganization follows this demolition of the feeling center. It is really brought about by a failure to handle conditions as a soul. Now, doesn't all this really give us pause to reflect? Sometimes you see people so closely bound to each other that when one dies, the other is so torn up by it that the other dies shortly afterwards. I think this happened, recently. There was the sudden death of, what was her name? It was Debbie Reynolds' daughter. She died on an airplane. Her heart just stopped beating. And very shortly afterwards, Debbie Reynolds experienced what was called a broken heart, and she died. Was it Carrie Fisher? Maybe that was her name. Then the mother died. I don't know if we could put the death of Buckminster Fuller in relation to his wife in the same category. He was a great thinking man, but he died. Did he die at her bedside? I'm trying to remember. Very, very shortly afterwards. She passed and he passed too. You hear all kinds of stories about this and what may be the cause of it. Well, it can be this loss of control and inability to handle conditions as a soul, or maybe it's something else. But people are, shall we say, deeply linked with each other. And, whoop, I've got to get this correct. The inability to handle conditions as a soul would handle them. This seems to be the usual broken heart. Basically, what we have to do is learn that there are ordinary interpretations and there are occult interpretations. And if we want to go deeply enough, I'm not doing too well here, but maybe I'll just leave it that way. And then would come the question, when we get very upset about the passing of another and feel our life cannot go on without them, are we handling conditions as a soul? Or are we in some kind of deep solar plexus bond with the other? Well, so far we've reviewed 3 types. Seem to be having some kind of difficulty here producing the blue I'm looking for. But I can't get hyper attached to that. I cannot allow myself to do that. So even though it's black, and I would like it to be the deep indigo, I'm just going to have to pass it by. Soul living is something that is easily spoken of and difficult to achieve. Difficult to achieve. And to be part of the fellowship of Christ's sufferings is not really found much today. This is what he's telling us. And the true broken heart is not personal, and therefore a very rare thing to find. and handling the conditions of life as a soul would handle them, difficult. Easy to talk about for a while. But then you ask the person, well, what is the soul? And then the confusion arises. Well, maybe I'll do one more. There are two other groups of telepathic possibilities. It goes on for a few pages. Yes, the hour is late, but, you have to strike while the iron is hot. We've looked at instinctual solar plexus telepathy. We've looked at mental telepathy. We've looked at heart-to-heart telepathy, so necessary in the group process. Now we have telepathic work from soul to soul. Maybe I will succeed in getting the necessary blue. I guess I have. Or maybe it's just my eyes now that black looks blue, or blue looks black. Okay. There is higher form of work, of course, but for humanity, the Tibetan says, this is for humanity the highest possible type of work. When a man can begin as a soul to respond to other souls and their impacts and impressions. And may I add, when you see somebody, do you see the soul, or are you just blinded by the obvious personality? But anyway, DK is saying that when a man can begin as a soul to respond to other souls and their impacts and impressions, then he is rapidly becoming ready for the processes which lead to initiation. And one would ask, does he mean what the masters consider to be the true first initiation, not just initiations of the threshold? Certainly I know of, and so do you, so many people who are in process of taking the initiations of the threshold, but they do not yet in any way complete respond to each other as souls, and do not receive from the others a majority of impressions which are soul impressions. Just think for a moment. Do you? I can think of so many instances in my life when dealing with the people around me or whatever, I simply have not seen through to their soul. I've responded to them far more as personalities, even though I know some of the language and the thoughts and so forth, which are characteristic of, or which indicate soul response. Maybe this is so for you also, perhaps. Becoming ready for the process of, maybe we can call it, true initiation, the real first initiation. Maybe by that time, when you are already becoming a chela within the ashram, within the master's aura, soul-to-soul response is habitually the kind of interplay that you most experience. It's something we can work on, you know. We're surrounded by many people, and some of them quite close to us in a personal sense. Hence, maybe we might say a solar plexus sense. Maybe they're, as it were, a member of the same emotional family as we are. And we can see if there's a different way of responding to them, one that is more of the soul. What we're really trying to do here is to make soul response the habitual method of response and interplay. And if we get into that attempt, we really will discover how difficult it is. And so DK goes on to say, well, look, there are other two other groups of telepathic possibilities, which I would like to list for you. They are possibilities only when the four above mentioned groups of telepathic impression are beginning to form a conscious part of the disciple's experience. Well, that is of interest, because we have to pass through preparation before we can experience what DK wants to discuss at this point. And, it's good to have things in order when things can occur. And we can see why a soul-to-soul telepathy would be important in this method whereby the soul contacts the mind, and then you have that mind held steady in the light, and whereby the soul encourages the soul-mind-brain alignment and reaches some sort of practicality in the outer world. Then at number 7, the elevation of the whole process shifts up a level. Let's see. So that would be page 22. And we're only now on page 21. I wonder, shall I go on a little? Something in me always likes to push forward. And yet, health being what it is or isn't, I know that it's not so advisable. Staying up till 7 in the morning is not advisable under the circumstances, but, pushing forward, it seems to be indicated. So this next one is the telepathic work between soul and mind. Now, obviously, some type of soul telepathy is needed before this can happen. The soul must be a something that is real to us, not just a bunch of words that are hard to decipher and about which people become very confused. I oftentimes think that if we could distinguish between solar angel, angel of the presence, and soul in general, plus the true ego or spiritual triad, we would have a much clearer idea of what the potentials actually are, and be in a position to execute those potentials. So is your soul impressing your mind? Sometimes when I work, I think no. I just know certain things and I repeat them, or think I know certain things. And sometimes a little flash of light occurs and I say, yes, looks like at this point the soul is impressing my mind. I think we have to be humble about these things, which is humility, an adjusted sense of right proportion. So anyway, this particular mode of telepathy goes from is offered in the following way by DK. This is the technique whereby the mind is held steady in the light and then becomes aware of the content of the soul's consciousness, an innate content of that which is part of the group life of the soul on its own level, and when in telepathic communication with other souls, as mentioned in our fourth heading. So that's what the soul gives when there is the mind held steady in the light. That's the word. That's the common phrase. The mind held steady in the light of the soul. Well, which one of us really has that? I suppose in very deep meditation, this does occur. And the question is, do we register this as occurring for us and, again, for our groups, the group in which we find ourselves? So the mind is held steady in the light, as DK says, and then he says, and then becomes aware of the content of the soul's consciousness. Our mind becomes aware of the content of the soul's consciousness, an innate content, or that which is part of the group life of the soul on its own level. The group life of the solar angel, of the angel of the presence, and when in telepathic communication, where with other souls, as mentioned under the fourth heading, telepathic work from soul to soul. I think we have to admit that these matters are abstruse, and only by sincere and continuous practice will they become realities for us. Soul content imparted to our mind and to the mind of the group. So I kind of want to just say that. Soul content imparted to the individual and to the group in which the individual finds himself or herself. The soul knows a great deal. The soul knows the divine plan, or at least a good measure of it, a lot more than the individual knows. Because remember, these solar angels and their projection, the angel of the presence, were human beings in a previous major solar system. And they have already far outstripped our own capacity. Some of us may have been individualized in that previous solar system, but we're not solar angels, and we did not go to Sirius for training, even though our origin of individualization may have begun there. So we can see why soul-to-soul interplay is needed before there can be an impression upon the mind of the individual and or the mind of the group. Now, this is intuitional telepathy. It's going beyond the unconscious emotional telepathy, beyond the more intellectually responsible mental telepathy. It's entering the higher worlds, from which point meditation can be successful, and there, on the ladder of evolution, are other forms of telepathy as well, which are even higher, but as far as what a human being can practice, this is it. So this is the true meaning, says the Tibetan, of intuitional telepathy. Through this means of communication, the mind of the disciple is fertilized with the new to him, new and spiritual ideas. He becomes aware of the great plan because of what the solar angel, conveys to him. His intuition is awakened. Intuitional telepathy, about which, of course, Master GK is speaking. Let's see if I can, okay. True meaning of intuitional telepathy. Something is conveyed from on high. As the soul within our own nature is, relative to our own normal state of consciousness, the soul is on high. Maybe certain great ideas which might dawn upon us with undeniable convincingness are coming from this level. And notice that word, fertilization, made productive, made more spiritually responsive because of that which the soul conveys. The soul, after all, or the solar angel, has been to Sirius for training, and that has taken great ages, that kind of training. Now, it didn't come back with nothing. It came back with much greater knowledge to be shared. Came back to our solar system with a much greater knowledge than when it departed. Knowledge of the great plan. And our knowledge of the plan is very skimpy. We have a few ideas that the great invocation, number 3, it embodies, encapsulated the divine plan. We understand that the 3 great lords of hierarchy, the Manu, the Mahacho, and the Bodhisattva, receive the divine plan from still higher beings that communicate it. But really, when we might say that even the members of the hierarchy only know, what is it, the first syllable of the name of Sanat Kumara, that we are not really in a position to know in any depth and fullness what the divine plan is, but the solar angel, angel of the presence, and to an extent the master, helps to convey to us through spiritual telepathy what the divine plan may be, or at least gives us a fuller idea. We can begin to grasp on our own what it might be because of the fertilization which has occurred. And this is what it means that of the recipient, it can be said that his intuition is awakened. Now, for most of us, it's not yet the case. DK goes on to say, one point should here be borne in mind, which is oft forgotten. The inflow of the new ideas from the Buddhic level, thus awakening the intuitional aspect of the disciple, indicates that his soul is beginning to integrate consciously and definitely with the spiritual triad, and therefore to identify itself less and less with the lower reflection, the personality. Okay. Now that integration, what is it? The true soul is the spiritual triad. The true ego, which is often what the soul structure within the causal body is called, the ego. It's not in this method of thought like the lower personality, how we in the West use the word ego. It's not that. We looked at certain lines in that chart. Wonder if I can find it. You know, like to find it, if I could. And my way of doing so, if I don't get hung up here, would be to go down to, well, at least go to F-disk and go to the diagrams which Tuya has created and which Keith Bailey worked upon. Let's see, what have we here? We don't have a, well, I wonder if you can see it. Unfortunately, this is rather small. I'm not sure that I can actually do this properly because it's a bit small, and that is something that's something new. It says zoom to fit. Well, view actual size, and for some reason I'm just not, there we go. So anyway, I'm going to hope that this gives me what I want if I don't forget what I was looking for. I hope you can see this, but notice that from the spiritual triad, lines from the lines from that triad go into the soul structure, as we usually call it. So we talk then about the soul integrating with the spiritual triad, and those lines of energy become more and more influential, we might say. And this begins to occur as we build the Antikarana. There's also a very important line coming from the will aspect of the monad, which is responsible for sustaining the central fire or jewel in the lotus. And in this diagram, we've gone even further. I hope well, looks like well, I'm just not sure what you're seeing now, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure that it is big enough. It should be bigger. And the actual size of all this, well, there it is, but are you seeing it? Anyway, there is a nourishing of the soul by the spiritual triad. And we might say then the integration of the soul into the true soul or spiritual triad. Well, these are just words until we can begin to realize them as experiences. Okay. So my screen sharing temporarily stopped here, but now maybe I'm back. That was a little bit of a mess, but sometimes I just don't have time to spend a long time digging into the reason. So what we have and what I try to show, the awakening of the intuitional aspect, which indicates that his soul is beginning to integrate consciously and definitely with the spiritual triad. Now, that is the area where the masters focus their consciousness, at least so many of them, on the 246 line. And it's a process of which we have to be aware. I think we are very far from it right now. We'll do well to even focus within the soul, yet alone participate in that integration of the triad and soul. Again, the spiritual triad being the true ego or soul. Just go to Cosmic Fire, page 176 and 177. So DK goes on. This mental sensitivity and rapport between soul and mind remain for a long time relatively inchoate. Let me add, that means sort of formless, relatively inchoate on the mental plane. But may I add, that is the first step of soul interacting with our vehicles in a way that is potentially more conscious to us. Now DK goes on. That which is sensed remains too vague or too abstract for formulation. It is the stage of the mystical vision and of the mystical unfoldment. It's taking place to a great extent above the head. Maybe it has not descended into the center of the head around the pineal gland. But the idea is that, and this is an important idea, why a further step is needed, is that it's too vague for formulation. And too vague to be practical in the carrying out of the divine plan. But then, I mean, carrying it out on the physical plane, because eventually that's where it has to manifest, and having inchoate rather vague ideas is not, it's not going to be sufficient. But it is a first step. It's a stage in the telepathic process which can occur once the soul-to-soul interplay is actually operating. Maybe a lot of wonderful, though vague ideas are coming through, but they can't be transferred yet because of their mystical vagueness and impracticality to the outer plane. But then, going on a bit, there is the telepathic work that carries this all a step further. And it's the telepathic work between soul and mind and brain. In other words, something really comes through from the soul without the interference of the glamours of the astral body. That's always something that we have to be mindful of in the white magical process, that the astral body doesn't get, and its many reactions, such as decay, discussed, that they don't get in the way. So in this stage, the mind still remains the recipient of impression from the soul, but in its turn, the mind, right, becomes a transmitting agent or communicator, which it does in relation to the etheric body. We're told that the etheric body controls the, the mind controls the etheric body. We're told that. And then the archetypal nature of the etheric body transmits its energy patterns to the outer physical plane. So the mind becomes now the transmitting agent or communicator. The impressions received from the soul, says the Tibetan, and the intuitions registered as coming from the spiritual triad, because may I add now the soul and triad are integrating, as he just told us in the last section, and the intuitions registered as coming from the triad via the soul are now formulated into thoughts. The vague ideas and the vision, hitherto unexpressed, looming, we might say, but not expressed, not understandably expressed. So the Tibetan says the vague ideas and the vision, hitherto unexpressed, can now be clothed in form and sent out as embodied thought forms to the brain of the disciple, and I would say via the normal etheric levels. In time, and as a result of technical training, the disciple can, in this way, reach the mind and brains of other disciples. So let's kind of put this in the yellow, indicating a higher degree of formulation of thought, not just a kind of inchoate gathering of vague thoughts, but formulated into recognizable thoughts. As he says, the vague ideas and the vision hitherto unexpressed can now be clothed in form and sent out as embodied thought forms to the brain of the disciple. Well, there it must anchor, we might say, if the divine plan is to make its way into our normal physical world. Now, how does that happen? The person is changing more from the mystic into the occultist. And so DK tells us that in time, and always time is a factor here for this training, in time, and as a result of technical training, the disciple can in this way reach the mind and brains of others. This is an exceedingly interesting stage. Well, Master DK is reaching the minds and brains of others. Certainly he is, every master is a disciple. Our planetary logos is a disciple. Our solar logos is a disciple. So it is a relative term, but we're used to considering it in a way closer to the human experience. So in time, and as a result of technical training, which the externalizing Master DK will be in a greater position to impart, the disciple can reach the mind and brains of other disciples. Now pause for a moment. Are we in any way successful in doing this? Or are we just filled with mental vagaries which we imagine are of some value and seem to be kind of interesting, even though inchoate, relatively formless, and not communicable in a recognizable manner to others? Sometimes you might wonder, you try to talk to other disciples. Are you coming through? Are you making yourself understood? Are your formerly inchoate ideas, are they clear now? Does the other disciple or even aspirant pick up what you are intending to convey? And does what you convey in some way enhance the quality of their lives, even on the physical plane? You have to sit in sit in judgment of yourself on that point. I know, in my own personal case, I try very hard to be clear, and sometimes I mess it up. Sometimes I misinterpret what the Tibetan has said, and or maybe what the angel of the presence has conveyed to me, and then I just have to live with that mistake, hoping that my students can see through it, but not happy at all about the fact that I have not clearly formulated what I might otherwise have clearly formulated. Anyway, DK says that we can reach the brain, just as he reaches the brain. What he says is not vague. It is precise. And in our brain consciousness, we understand what he says. We don't have to somehow say, well, what he says is hovering in a rather formless manner on the higher levels of my consciousness. We don't have to say that. Everything is precise. Some kind of exactitude of thought is coming through his writings. Now, this is an exceedingly interesting stage, says the Tibetan. It constitutes one of the major rewards of right meditation and involves much true responsibility. He puts an adjective in there, not falsely assumed responsibility, which we find to be a glamour related to the second ray, as is discussed in the early 120s of the book Glamour, a World Problem. And you will find, he says, more anent this stage of telepathy in my other books, and particularly a treatise on white magic. Well, there, in that book, the soul is attempting to bring through some formulation, and all that the soul must go through and the various ways the personality must respond are given there. Maybe more attention to the liabilities of the astral body are offered in that book, and the dangers involved. An exceedingly interesting stage. Now, you and I, as teachers of some kind, we do want to reach the mind and brain of others. Or at least, we want what we say to be understood, and we do not cultivate, at least deliberately, an attitude of confusion among the others. We seek clarity. Now, Master DK is a great example of being able to convey thought with clarity. And we can emulate him and become effective esoteric teachers, esoteric educators. Many of us, whatever else we do, will be following that particular path. Okay. Well, every time I say something like okay, it acts as if what I've said is really understood and that I really understand it, and no more is to be said. But, of course, that's just not true. So this is maybe the last paragraph that I'm going to undertake right now. This much that I have outlined here is practically all that concerns man in his own individual contacts and work and training. There is, however, a whole range of telepathic contacts. May I say I've been emphasizing that idea, right? There is, however, a whole range of telepathic contacts which should be noted because they constitute the goal for humanity. And now we will, when we resume, we will talk about maybe higher forms of telepathy involving members of the hierarchy in their stratified ascent, masters, Chohans of the seventh degree, even Sanat Kumara himself. So we have gone, it's always with some regret that I leave a section realizing how little I may have contributed here that is of real value. We are on page 22, and this is what I want to bring down to the bottom. It's going to be the end of program number 9 on this day when we're just about to move into the sign Scorpio, which always brings its amazing surprises. So we've done 6 out of the proposed 10 methods of telepathy, filling out the general picture of what telepathy is from the very simplest expression of a 3-way type of interaction into a degree of greater complexity. So basically, I think we're on page 20 to 22, and we'll begin, whenever we do begin, with program number 10. Today is the 23rd of October, and we'll begin with page 22. Not quite knowing when, which is the reason I'll put those X's there. Now, sometimes I get a fresh wind, as was the case now. I was so convinced I was absolutely too tired to do anything whatsoever further. But something, as they say, came over me. What was the source? What was the source? It was a definite something. Was it the soul? What was it? So maybe if I was a little more sensitive to the origin of the energy currents, I would know. But I don't really know. I just know that it has allowed me to go on a bit more. And then 7, 8, 9, 10 will be taken up, and they are different ranges of telepathic contacts. We have to know what really concerns humanity and what the human being can do, and we have to know then what the human being cannot do, because it is of too high a nature. So friends, my hope is that, so far it looks like I have done this somewhat correctly, and I'm not guilty of talking about what you don't see. And this ninth program will be put up on Makara and up on our Moria Federation channel, Moria Federation Esoteric Education, and some little synopses will be made by the members of our communication team. So, Tui and I and all the communications team wish you a successful assimilation. And by the way, well, it'll be too late by the time you reach this one, but I think I did record one of these programs at too low a volume, so just lift up the volume on your computer and you'll probably hear what you have to hear. I wish I was technically more proficient. Okay, so this will be transmitted to BL, who will get it up on Makara, and Joe and Harold will get it up on Moria Federation Esoteric Education, and before long, if I have about 4 or 5 hours straight, I will be in a position to send you quite a few of these various programs with the text on the side. Oh, it's not a text that's terribly accurate at all points, because the text transmitter, the translator, the audio transcript, just doesn't have words such as I may tend to use, or such as may be found within the teaching. So, wishing you the very best and going on from here when possible. We will be in touch. I think well, it doesn't do me any good to tell you what's coming up for tomorrow because it's not your tomorrow anymore by the time you get here. Okay, friends. Bye-bye for now.